Okay, welcome everybody to episode 27 of the Academy of Management Review Origin series. My name's Greg Fisher, and today I have the privilege of hosting Parthiban David, Ravi Dharwadkar, and Augustine Duru to talk about their paper, Financial Reporting Choices, Governance and Strategic Assets, or Transaction Cost Perspective. I was just saying to the three of them before we got started that as someone who was previously in the world of accounting and then shifted over into management and strategy areas, it was like my two previous lives were being fused together. The world of generally accepted accounting practices and the choices that are made there, and the world of transaction cost economics and understanding some of the choices that are made within firms. So this is going to be a fascinating discussion, and it's wonderful to have the three of you make the time to join us here on the AMR Origin series. So just to start off with, can we maybe ask each of you just to briefly introduce yourselves? What university are you at? What's your sort of primary focus of research and scholarship? And then we'll get into how did you connect to write this paper and what's in this paper.
Okay. I'll start. I'm Parthiban David. I'm the Collins Professor of Management and the Senior Associate Dean at the Kogart School of Business. My area of research is on the linkages between corporate governance, strategy, and performance. And currently, what I'm most interested in are linkages with accounting and how measurement choices in accounting can influence governance, thereby affecting strategy and performance.
Thank you. Ravi?
Yes, my name is Ravi Dharwadkar. I'm the Whitman Advisory Council Professor of Management and Chair of the Management Department at the Whitman School at Syracuse University. And I dabble in research in the area of corporate governance, largely through an org theoretic perspective. And I've been doing this for about 25 years, and I love working with my doctoral students on different topics in corporate governance.
Thank you, Ravi. Augustine?
Yes, my name is Augustine Duru. I'm a professor of accounting, and my primary research focus is on the impact of accounting performance measures on governance and performance. I also teach courses in strategic cost accounting, where I attempt to link cost management to the strategy of organizations.
And you're also at American University, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so that's obviously one of the connections, and it's clear we've got very senior and accomplished author team on the call today, so it's going to be fascinating to hear from you. Can you tell us a little bit, just before we get into the nuance of the paper, how the three of you connected to write this paper?
Yeah, and I think there's one word, and it's friendships. Augustine is a colleague of mine in the accounting department. His office was right across from mine, and we became friends, and we started talking, and we realized that we have a lot in common, research interests in common that we really should be exploring together, that strategy scholars and accounting scholars indeed study similar questions. They just do them in somewhat different ways. Why not pool our resources together so that we can better address questions? And Ravi is a long-time friend of mine. We both graduated from our PhDs at the same time and have stayed in touch over the years. And interestingly, Ravi is also, we can speak for himself, but he also has connected with accounting. And he also has an expertise in publishing in AMR, which was very important to me because I had not published in AMR before. Thank you.
Good. Well, that's, so I love that friendship. It's a point of connection, and it's actually a theme that we've heard on a number of these different discussions with AMR authors, is that often papers are born out of friendship, and people are just interested in working together, and they find a fascinating problem to tackle. So can you give us a sense of what this paper is about at a fairly high level, the main gists of the paper and how you managed to bring these different worlds together in an interesting way.
Sure. So let me try and help you out here. So first, let me thank you, Greg. I know this is a lot of work, doing this. I don't know how many times you have done it, but I'm sure it's challenging and interesting. So thank you for doing this. So this is a paper about transaction cost, or TCE, as you said. And it's one of those few areas where in management we can say the foundational insights come from two Nobel Prize-winning economists, Coase and Williamson. So that's a pretty cool thing, right? And Coase pointed to the existence of transaction costs way back in 1937 when he was like a student in Dundee, Scotland, or someplace like that. And then Williamson articulated a very nice framework in his famous book, Markets and Hierarchies, in about 1975. So as a strategy scholar, you're well aware that this is one of those theories that we use in strategy research. And when I teach my org theory seminar, I use Joe Mahoney's book, Economic Foundations of Strategy. And in that book, he neatly summarizes sort of the received wisdom of TCE, and that's get the governance right to minimize transaction costs, right? So we have talked about this for a while, and as we discussed, Parthiban, myself, and Augustine, it was clear to us that the measurement part of TCE had been ignored, the measurement branch, so to speak. And so we decided to focus on how do we incorporate this measurement concerns. So as an accountant, that's the central life interest of an accountant, right? How do you measure things and so on and so forth. So we decided to sort of do that in 4 steps. And that's what this paper is about. It's saying, yes, Mahoney does talk about getting governance right, but what we are doing is incorporating measurement into this governance framework. So our first step is, we want to stick to stuff we know, and that's corporate governance. That's where we live. So we chose that arena to do this research. Second, we sort of resurfaced Williamson's idea that equity and debt are not merely financial instruments. They're actually governance mechanisms, and they suit certain kinds of asset specificities to reduce transaction costs. Okay. And third, this is where Augustine's input becomes extremely important. We expropriated or appropriated ideas from accounting research. In strategy, we pay less attention to the fact that managers have tremendous discretion in this financial reporting process, right? And they make choices that can result in either income smoothing or conservatism, and extreme case would be fraud, right? So we sort of took those ideas from accounting research, and then we pull them back into the governance framework, okay? And we sort of argue that these managerial choices will affect transaction cost over and above that alignment that takes place that people have been talking about for a long time. So in other words, we come with this modified received wisdom that you don't have to just get governance right, you have to get governance and measurement right. In other words, strategy and accounting both have to work in concert to minimize transaction costs. So in a nutshell, that's the summary of the paper.
So measurement is discretion over how things are measured, and what you do with regards to measurements, whether you choose to smooth things out and or lump it together, and at what point you account for things. And then there's this whole notion that really equity and debt are not merely financial instruments, but are considered as governance mechanisms in themselves. And so it's interesting in the sense that you're really borrowing strongly from both Williamson's original insight and connecting it with some of the insight from accounting. And so it's not necessarily a brand new insights, but by connecting these things, you're able to generate new insights. So I think it's a really exemplary paper in the sense that you've taken these divergent insights and begun to connect them together. And we often talk in helping people try and think about theory papers about what are your options for writing a theory paper. And one of them is to integrate insights from diverse perspectives. And I think that's what you've been able to do. So almost like going back in history and integrating it with a different sort of discipline or broad area within a business school. So that's really fascinating. So who who do you expect to be most intrigued by this paper, or who's the primary audience for this paper?
Do I chime in?
Go ahead.
Okay. From the accounting point of view, I do believe that the research also benefits us. Accounting scholars over time, as you have just said, have shown that accounting discretion will affect governance effectiveness, but have not fully, really, especially in financial accounting, considered the linkages with strategy. So one hopes that this paper will help to more fully appreciate the strategic role of financial accounting. And also, one believes also that our students who are going to be future managers will benefit from using these insights to make accounting decisions that will align with their strategic decisions, thereby enhancing the performance of a firm. So that is from the point of view of the accounting profession.
So one quick follow-up to that, and then we'll come back just in terms of maybe the management side of the equation. But how do we, as an AMR paper, accountants are probably not searching for AMR for their next theoretical insights or perspective. How do we get this paper in front of an accounting audience, Augustine? Are there any interesting things that one might do to get your insights in front of accounting scholars so that they might appreciate what you've done here?
That's a great question, but I have to add that actually we have begun to read management papers.
You have.
we are beginning to do that because actually, if you come to an accounting department now, you can see some names in who are published in SMG and all that. So I do believe that gradually it will begin to seep in there. So what you can do at this point includes this YouTube, right? I mean, it's also something that will be accessible, I'm sure, to some accountants.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that for anyone looking for new insights, the extent to which you can, and this is a broader sort of statement around creating novelty in a current domain. If you're in management and all you read is the management literature, your chance of coming up with something that's novel and unique is way less likely than if you look across across one of the sort of disciplinary boundaries into whether it's accounting or finance or marketing or operations, and then vice versa. And so it's encouraging to hear that accountants are actually starting to delve into some of our management perspectives, and I think that we can, by and large, do the same. What about strategy scholars? Which sort of branch or domain of strategy scholars do you think are going to find this most interesting?
So I see this as something that contributes to mainstream strategy, specifically the role of corporate governance in shaping strategy and performance. And if you take a step back, the canonical question in strategy is why do some firms outperform others? And the answer is really lies in a variety of choices. It's the integration of multiple choices that leads to a competitive advantage. And so the insights that one needs to bring into play to have this integrated strategy is you have to draw from expertise in really all of the disciplines. So strategy is fundamentally multidisciplinary. You need to know about marketing, you need to know about operations, you need to know about finance, and you need to know about accounting. And in some sense, that was what we saw as the gap, is that, yes, when you look at the strategy literature, some of these other areas have been interwoven into strategy, but accounting is sort of a black box. We seem to simply take for granted that accounting numbers are hard numbers in some sense. When a company reports a net income or a return on assets, that's a hard number. But that number is really shaped by financial reporting choices that the firm is making. How does that affect the strategy? So for us, that's why it's really important to strategy and to governance that we integrate these insights from accounting and bring it into the strategy fold.
Yeah, I concur that my hope would be that this becomes sort of a core reading for strategy scholars who are examining sort of more contemporary views of TCE and how it can be utilized to continue to understand the nuances of organizations, of the world, of strategy within that context. So that's really cool. So I'd love to know just how this all got started. So what was, and now I'm referring in particular to this paper, the idea that you're going to incorporate or bring together this measurements and governance perspective, and the idea that you can incorporate, in order to do that, you can incorporate sort of a perspective of accounting with the more traditional governance perspective of TCE. How did you actually, the three of you, come together and initiate this project and then push it along?
This paper is really 10 years in the making. So this didn't just happen overnight, where we just sat together and came up with a paper and we wrote it and sent it to a journal. This was 10 years in the making. And the original idea was a simple conjecture that accounting, essentially financial reporting choices, do matter for strategy. But to get to a manuscript, it required a lot more. For me, it required essentially the equivalent of a doctoral seminar in accounting. So Augustine was my teacher. He was an accounting professor. He gave me a reading list, and we actually sat and worked through this over a series of several weeks, and I learned accounting from him. There were a lot of conversations that took place between the three of us, lots of drafts that got circulated and numerous brown bag presentations. But I'd love to hear from my colleagues also about how their journey was.
Sure. So it's been a very long journey in some sense. Most of the times we teach our students, and in my particular case, I had accounting students taking my doctoral seminars about 2 decades ago. And one that stands out to me was a young man by the name of Scott Dolman. And since that time, he took 2 of my seminars, and I served on his doctoral dissertation committee. And since that time, he has written the 2 most influential papers on accounting conservatism, one in the Journal of Accounting and Economics and one in Journal of Accounting Research, which are like the top journals in accounting. So having to serve on his committee forced me to read about accounting conservatism. So I was exposed to it. In a strange way, my doctoral student taught me more about this topic. And as sort of this relationship developed, a lot of accounting doctoral students ended up taking my seminars. So eventually I published a lot with those students. And in 2016, I had this particular concept of conservatism that we use in this paper, in an SMJ paper too. So I was sort of creeping in that direction. And if I recall correctly, about 10 years ago, Augustine and Parthiban invited me to present to the accounting department at American. And I believe that's the first time I met Augustine too. That my suspicion is that was the start of this 10-year conversation, saying, hey, we're doing this stuff, and we know a little bit about strategy. Augustine knows a lot of accounting. How do we put all this together and come to this paper? So I would give a lot of credit to my students for teaching me about things that I really wasn't aware of. But when you have to read a dissertation 2 or 3 times, you do get to know stuff. So
3 important things that I want to just pick up on there, or just reinforce or reflect on. First thing is, Parthiban, your willingness to learn and to delve deep and to, do the equivalent of a doctoral seminar in accounting to be able to cross that boundary with some level of confidence and insight. And I think, in this day and age of doing things quickly and everything must be done rapidly, we often try and take shortcuts, but there's no shortcuts to building that base of knowledge. And I think it's important for more junior scholars to understand that. The second thing is the importance of learning from those that are in our classrooms who potentially come with different experiences, whether it's different scholarly experiences or different practical experiences, depending on what they may have done before. And Ravi, just your openness to learning from your students, essentially, and then going through that cycle multiple times, I think is valuable. And then thirdly, the value that can often come from doing talks at another institution and how those connections are forged and formed through that come to be as a new paper. But then there's also the challenge that you face of sustaining the effort and the work for 10 years on a single paper. Was there anything that you did to sort of keep yourselves motivated and to keep yourselves engaged and to keep moving this thing along for such a long period of time? Or did everyone just sort of naturally remain committed to the process?
If I may chime in here, for me, really, as I mentioned before, the whole project was close to both my primary focus in research and my teaching. So in terms of research, that remained interesting for me to really understand that. But in terms of teaching, I teach strategic cost management. But my knowledge of strategy was very, very low. So I knew it was going to be beneficial, and it was working with Parthiban and Ravi. And I learned a lot. But finally, also, theory building based on arguments was completely new to me. My work is on empirical analysis, and theory building is not the focus at all. And in accounting and finance, I'm more familiar with theory that relies on mathematical proofs. So this was extremely new and interesting. And I have to say, I learned a lot from these two guys, I have to say. So it was really, and now I can boast before the accounting audience that I'm a strategy guy also, So I learned a lot.
Good. Anything else just in terms of sustaining interest and focus that I mean, especially for you for the other two of you, just in terms of, it's a long time to work on a single manuscript. But I know you've obviously got a lot of other things going on, both being in sort of leadership and administrative positions. But just in terms of 10 years and keeping it going, anything that strikes you as beneficial?
I think one is, I'd say, is having tenure is a good thing. That's what it's supposed to do, is that I'm not worried about getting my next publication because I'm coming up for a 10-year review. Right. So for all three of us, and it can be a challenge if you have a co-author who needs a quick publication. For all three of us, we didn't need the quick publication. This was something we believed in. We didn't want something quick. We really wanted to tease this out and understand this and work on it. So that it sort of sets the stage. And it was, we enjoyed hanging out. So we just had fun. All these conversations were great. It was really very smooth, and the topic itself was just fascinating for us. And even when we got, feedback that was really not complimentary, or no, this doesn't make any sense at all, it only spurred us to just dig deeper and try to really get into the phenomena and try to understand it and refine our ideas and come up with a better story.
Good. So what were some of the sort of I guess like pivot points or key junctures in the development of this? If you think about the evolution of the paper, were there certain key points where you thought, oh, suddenly we need to bring this in, or we need to check this out, or we need to think about things differently, or were there any sort of big juncture points in the development of this paper that you can recall that might be informative for others sort of trying to walk a similar journey?
I'll mention one others might have. When we started it, it was more of a, we need to integrate accounting and strategy. And I think the reaction we got, okay, we understand that. It's good to integrate two things, but conceptually, how does that move the needle? It's all very well to say you're integrating two fields. So for us, one of the breakthroughs was to get into transaction cost economics and really make that separation that there is a governance branch and a measurement branch. And the governance branch is really focused on the mechanisms of governance, the use of incentives, right? Whether you monitor, you use incentives, that sort of a thing. And measurement is, how do you measure performance? And I think that gave us a breakthrough where we could then say, here's a conceptual contribution that our paper is making. It's not just integrating accounting and strategy, but it's taking this transaction cost economics, which has developed along these two branches, and showing how, when you put the two together, you reduce transaction costs by including measurement considerations along with governance considerations.
Yeah, I think for me, that was in reading the paper, which I might not otherwise have picked up if I wasn't doing this, but that was a very revealing insight of these two branches. I wasn't even aware that there was sort of this measurement branch out there. I always thought, well, transaction cost economics is about how do we think about how things are governed. But the more I got down that path and drew a little bit of my background in accounting, I was like, oh, this makes sense. And now we've got this debt and equity idea, and that makes sense. And so I certainly believe and hope that that will actually be one of the fundamental reasons that this paper is utilized and cited going forward, because it reawakens that perspective of transaction cost economics. So it makes sense that was a key point in which you feel like you made a breakthrough. Were there any other things that, if you look back on the journey, that were like, oh, I'm glad we did that, or maybe it was something in the actual revise and resubmit process, which, as you've alluded to, can sometimes be daunting and tough and difficult, or maybe it was something prior to that in presenting it or just in working with each other that seems to be part of the journey that helped you get to where you are?
So I think a couple of things happened along the way. So all three of us have written papers in different top-tier journals. And so I get a good paper through. It's not just who writes the paper, it's how the paper is reviewed, right? So you need the insights from the editor, and the reviewers have to sort of see what the paper can contribute to in terms of the literature. I think we were very fortunate. We had amazing editor and reviewers. And one thing they were able to do for us is help us focus the paper. And the key sort of input from one of the reviewers was, instead of focusing on transaction costs in all situations, why did you narrow it down to a manageable setting? And that's a corporate governance setting, which is where we use equity and debt. And I think once you do that, the paper just flows. It becomes easy, and you can see it's done at that point. So I believe the editor had the right insights about that in terms of telling us to address that particular concern very seriously. So I would give a lot of credit to the reviewer and the editor. This is co-production. It's not just us, right? It's not just three of us. There's a whole ecosystem that goes into writing a paper. And both Parthiban, Augustine, and myself, we all have been reviewers too. sometimes you end up writing as much as a paper writer in your long 5 or 6 page review. So I think we were very thankful to both the editor and the reviewer for getting us to that point where we could pivot and say, okay, this now makes sense, and then we could run with it for the next 2 rounds.
And that is often part of the challenge of a conceptual paper, is because you're not constrained by an empirical setting or the data that you've got. You can go so broad, and you'll end up going too broad. And it's that narrowing down that just helps you get everything down to 35 or 40 pages, and it becomes a single manuscript as opposed to a book or something of that nature.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just like to add is when a paper gets rejected, you submit a paper and it gets rejected, then the message you get is everything is bad about your paper, right? And so it's quite disheartening, and often it's hard to tell what direction we should take because everything is bad. Now, when you get a revise and resubmit, you often get a similar message, a lot of things that are wrong with the paper, but you get enough direction also. So they point you in a direction, and that limits that helps you to see how you can move forward to tell a coherent story. We found that the reviewer feedback was really very helpful. In fact, the reviewer comments that we most vehemently disagreed with when we first read them, they turned out to be the most helpful, because as we kept, our first reaction was, well, the reviewers are wrong. We were so clear in what we wrote. And then we had to go back and really understand where they were coming from. And then we understood what the problems were and how they should be fixed. And so it takes a long time sometimes, to understand why the reviewers are telling us these things. These are surprisingly basic problems sometimes, where I'll give you a couple of examples. So I think we were using a lot of shorthand jargon from transaction cost economics, just words borrowed from the theory, without explaining it in our context. And we really had to do that. Otherwise, we are just repeating what Williamson is saying and not really tying it to the phenomena that we are studying. That was one very basic, seemingly basic issue. Another was a lack of clarity in presenting accounting theory. All these concepts in accounting, we can't write an accounting paper, obviously, but we have to provide the essence so that the reader can understand what we are talking about. So we need to do that. And then there are the usual inconsistencies. We think we are making a logical argument, but often there are gaps in the logic. There are inconsistencies in the logic that we need to iron out. Again, the reviewers are very helpful in pinpointing where those inconsistencies are so that we can see the weak areas and we can fix those areas. After we do that, it seems so simple that we ask ourselves, why didn't we do that in the first place? But that's when you understand that's the nature of the beast. That's how the journey progresses.
And I want to ask about two specific things which we don't see in all AMR papers, and I'd be interested to know what was the thinking behind using these two concepts or ideas in this paper. And they're more sort of stylistic and in terms of how you formatted the paper, but you've used quite extensive endnotes. At least the endnotes you do have are fairly lengthy, and they go into quite a lot of detail and quite specific. And then also offered an appendix, which is the overview of accrual accounting. Can you just tell us a little bit of the backstory of how did you get to sort of quite extensive endnotes, which are not necessarily the norm in AMR papers, and what was the thinking behind having this appendix about accrual accounting?
I think it's the issue of when you integrate two fields, when you're trying to bring in ideas from a different field into management, from accounting. Accrual accounting is taken for granted in an accounting setting. But while we may have a smattering of what that means, for the typical strategy audience, there are nuances to accrual accounting, which we do need to lay out because our arguments are based on that. So we thought having that appendix, which lays out the basics of accrual accounting, the fact that accounting is not a hard number. When you can make financial transactions unfold over a period of time, but the transaction has to be recorded now. You have to record your net income. You have to record the economic implications now before it has fully unfolded. That's the choice that accountants have to make. And they have many choices they can make in doing that. So we had to explain how accrual accounting works in order to explain how you can be conservative and how you can smooth earnings. So that's why we had that appendix. And then we get into some technical details on there are different kinds of smoothing or there are different kinds of conservatism, which are important in the accounting literature. If we include them in the main manuscript, it sort of impedes the flow of the logic that we have there. So relegating some of those important but perhaps technical details to the endnotes helped us to tell a clean story while not sacrificing the content. Augustine, perhaps you might have something to add there because many of these endnotes were crafted by you.
Yeah, no, actually, one believes that the accounting issues that were raised, and in my opinion, they greatly enhanced the clarity and strengthened the arguments of the paper. But there were so many accounting issues that were raised, and as you would expect, because of the wall between the two disciplines, there was a lot in accounting that the reviewers had to bring up. So as Parthiban has explained, we were compelled to put some of them in the footnotes and actually had to ensure that we respond to some of the queries inside the paper. So in my opinion, it's based on what Parthiban has just said regarding the fact that the reviewers kind of they were not as comfortable with certain accounting concepts and all that. So we believe that the reader also will have to understand how accounting works for the arguments to flow well. And there were some interesting questions raised by the reviewers. For example, they were asking, is it possible it will unravel? I mean, accounting numbers to unravel. That is in the long run. Whether you do conservatism or you do income smoothing, it will be the same thing in the long run. So that kind of avoids the basic concept of accrual accounting, which is that we are measuring performance over a period. So it's periodic performance that's involved. So we had to explain all of that because, again, even if I say so, accounting is not an easy. You will know accounting is an easy discipline to understand. So I guess that was the reason that we had to do it.
But I think it beautifully highlights, and this conversation beautifully highlights the tension that any AMR author faces, is that you need the detail. You need to be able to justify what you're saying. You need to back it up with logic and with make it grounded in wherever you borrowed the ideas from with the specific detail. But it is at the same time important to make a paper tight, to make it readable, to make it flow. And it's that tension that you were grappling with including enough detail to justify everything that's going on, but at the same time, keeping the paper tight, making it flow, providing a sort of momentum within reading the paper. And so I would expect that doing those two things, having the appendix and having those more detailed footnotes or endnotes to the paper, allowed you to achieve both, to still have the detail, but to make the actual manuscript fairly tight and fairly easy to read and to keep moving towards the two propositions and everything else that you offer. So I want to end off by asking where to next from here with this paper. And I guess you can think about it on two levels. On the one level, for yourselves, what do you do as a next step beyond this? But then at a broader level, in terms of the field, whether it's in the realm of accounting or in the discipline of accounting or in the discipline of sort of strategy and strategic management and corporate governance, where would you like others to take these ideas, or what would you like to see come out of this? And this is a great opportunity to potentially spark a continued discussion and debate and exploration of the ideas in your paper.
Do I
go ahead? Okay.
So if I come from the accounting point of view, because again, I do believe, in my opinion, that the study really will help accounting scholars, but also practitioners and policy makers, because it does help them to avoid the pitfalls of considering the implications of financial accounting approaches from only one discipline without recognizing the interlinkages that one would expect with a field like strategy. For example, in accounting, you have contradictory demands for increased use of specific measures. And this is based on what we regard as the well-known trade-off between the relevance of a measure and the reliability of a measure. So, for example, scholars prefer conservatism because it's more reliable, it's easy to verify. But practitioners, as studies have shown, prefer income smoothing because it's more informative, it's more relevant to their decisions. Now, policymakers, all of a sudden, even against GAAP, prefer fair value accounting because of the relevance also. So one believes that our research, based on these interlinkages with strategy, indicates that the efficacy of these measures is likely to be based on the needs of the governance mechanisms. So in my opinion, I do believe that for both scholarship, practice, and policy, that our study would provide a guidance.
Well said. Thank you. Other thoughts? Just Ravi?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we're able to do in this paper, because of the context, is put measurement and governance together. And there are numerous domains where we apply TC, like supplier management, boundary of the firm, and there are so many different places where you see this. And typically everything ends with governance.
Yep.
So our hope is that all these other sort of domains start thinking about what are the measurement implications of performance measurement for transaction costs in those domains. So that really has received very scant attention. So I think that's probably one. And second, I think we are sort of moving from the industrial economy to this platform ecosystem, very different innovation knowledge economy. And again, as you move through, different TC issues will come up, right? How do you use conservatism and knowledge as sort of important driver of value creation? So I can see two ways. One is broadening it to other areas of TC, and second is thinking about how do you apply this in a changing world. And I think that's a more difficult question, perhaps needs more time and attention. So,
and conservatism and smoothing are fairly observable, are they not? I mean, am I right in saying that if you were trying to now shift into the empirical world, they would actually be observable from one year to the next in a particular organization, and hence you're not theorizing things here that cannot ever be measured. There's actually mechanisms to go out and to use this as a basis to run empirical studies and to either test ideas that are in here or validate ideas that are in here, but also to extend beyond that in an empirical setting.
Sure.
Am I correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there's a vast literature in accounting that does that. And that's what my doctoral students exposed me to. And that's what Augustine exposed me to. So there are very clean measures. So for accountants, there's no debate about these things. They get income smoothing and they get accounting conservatism. Of course, they debate there are different measures of conservatism and there are different kinds of smoothing. But there's some broad consensus that, yes, these things can be measured empirically. And so from that perspective, I guess we can bring them into strategy and do empirical research that follows up on the models in this paper.
Awesome. Parthiban, any other thoughts from you as to sort of what could be next steps or things that might get you personally excited or you would be excited to see others do?
Absolutely. These are the questions that I am very interested in pursuing in my own research, both conceptually and empirically, teasing out some of the implications of our theoretical study to test some of these ideas in an empirical setting. That's one. I also hope that our paper inspires others to also run with these ideas and test them and build on the model that we have. Very excited about that. I want to point out one thing, that there are a lot of papers in management that reference accounting. Most of these papers reference earnings management or cooking the books, as they call it colloquially, right? And there's almost the sense that you can either cook the books or you can follow GAAP and report things right. And there's this sense then that if you report things right using GAAP, then you come up with good numbers. And the hope is that measures such as ROA, which we mechanically use in strategy studies, we build an awareness that this ROA number is really shaped by financial reporting choices that firms are making, right? And it's not that they can be choices that are based on GAAP. There's nothing wrong with them. But the choice you make can yield very different ROA numbers. It all depends on the choice. And the choice you pick has to be aligned with your governance and strategy. If it is aligned, it enhances value. It gives you a competitive advantage. If not, it doesn't do that. Hopefully, that way of framing the issue can guide future research in new directions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you to the three of you for being willing to participate in this and being open about the process, open about how this came together. And it is so refreshing to see this, what we might think of in the business school as cross-disciplinary work.
Mm-hmm.
I often think our colleagues on other campuses think everyone in the business school does similar things, but we know that there are these silos and that it actually takes effort and energy and often new learning to break down these silos, and for someone from accounting to learn about transaction cost economics and the nuances of corporate governance and strategic choices in that setting, and vice versa if you're going to go and incorporate ideas from accounting. So it was fascinating to learn about your willingness to learn from each other and to learn from students, and to be vulnerable in presenting ideas to other groups of people, and to persist, just to stick with it and allow a slow hunch to evolve into what I think is a very powerful paper. So thanks for being willing to share on that.
And thank you.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's, ladies and gentlemen, is another edition of the AMR Origin series. And that is the first one that I've been involved in where we've had such a strong accounting perspective. And it was refreshing, interesting, and intriguing. And so I hope that you've all been able to take something away from this, and whether it is an effort to integrate with another area, or whether it is the recognition that one needs to persist and learn as you go through the process of writing an AMR paper. Invariably, you'll be able to learn something from this. So keep going, and we look forward to the next one. Thank you.